Creative Industry Awards don't just recognize excellence, they showcase work that moves people, drives business, and reshapes culture. As the lead creative, we've collaborated with Bizcommunity to unpack what makes winning work and why it stands out. In this episode, I co-host a conversation with the editor of Bizcommunity, Danette Breitenbach, where we are joined by two South Africans who made their mark on the global stage. We focus on the recent Cannes Lions with Xolisa Dyeshana, the Chief Creative Officer of Joe Public, who was the jury president for audio and radio at Cannes.
I think for me, what we're not talking about in this conversation is the fact that I don't think that as a country, we believe enough in creativity and the difference that it can truly make to business. And it's very interesting for me because what it takes to create the kind of work that has the kind of impact that we see so much of the work that we admire have is it takes 50% of the agency. It takes the 150% of that 100% is the agency. The other 50% is the client and the brand. And what I find is that we still come from a history where the award stuff is stuff that's done on the side, not really where the major budgets go.
We're also joined by Saf Sindhi, CCO of Bananas, where he spends most of his time walking the tightrope between chaos and meaning. They won the Gold Lion in the film category at the 2025 Cannes Lions for their hugely compelling work with KFC Thailand.
I think most agencies and creators and brand representatives need to do is be very honest with themselves about when they are manipulating and having fun with and hacking an insight rather than just mirroring it. And I think there's a systemic problem in South Africa. It's when I switch on the TV and I see our advertising or listen to the radio or look online, I see just a mirror of culture being played right back at me. And we're not living in a world where we can do that anymore.
Look out for more of these conversations on Bizcommunity and The Lead Creative. Subscribe and be the first to know when we release new episodes. Welcome to the Lead Creative Podcast, where we talk to creative industry leaders, influencers, and brands. We discuss the strategies that influence brand thinking and shape industries. Thought leaders and heads of agencies let us in on some of their thinking and insights. I'm your host, Mongezi Mtati. Enjoy the show, and please share and subscribe. Xolisa, Saf, and Danette, thank you so much for making time for this first of these series of conversations around awards and what's happening in the awards scene, both locally and internationally. Xolisa, I'll start with you in terms of just starting off the conversation. You've judged shows globally, from the Louis to DNAD, and of course you were recently the president of the audio and radio jury at Cannes Lions this year. Why do you think South African agencies performed better seemingly this year than they did last year? What changed?
Look, I think firstly, I'll be the first one to say I'm grateful that our performance was slightly better than last year. Although most definitely not where we would like it to be. And I think, to answer your question, I think it's the changing landscape of the industry of communication, and it's us having to sort of adjust our ways. I think that the competition is a lot stiffer. I think there's quite a lot that we've had to sort of change in terms of how we create work, the amount of work that we create, the quality of the work that we create. I just think the competition is just getting stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. So while you are busy lifting your standards, so is everybody else. And that's just the reality of it. But I think for me, this year was very encouraging to say that we can still do it, and it just needs us to keep going towards that until it clicks again as it has in the past.
And incidentally, the category that you were president on is one that we've always led in historically, as South Africa, especially on the radio side of things. Things have seemingly moved more into the audio space with podcasts and things like that. So to your point about competition being stiffer, it has become really stiff. How are we performing in that category?
Look, this year, I think this year I was very proud about the fact that we featured. It was a really, really, really tough category. And I think, it's probably the best example of what it is that you and I are discussing, because if you look at what we had representing us in the category, it very much fell into what is known as traditional radio. But if you look at what was awarded, probably 98% of it was more audio experiential type of spots. And so I think there is the perfect example of how we need to perhaps challenge ourselves in terms of our traditional understanding of what radio is and what radio can be, take more risks, and do what everybody else seems to be doing, which is to say it doesn't have to be a passive experience for the consumer. It can be an engaging experience. It can be a direct experience. It can be a visual experience, and that's where everybody seems to be venturing. And I think it's time for us to actually stretch ourselves and start to play in that game as well.
Saf, I'll come to you now. Congratulations, first of all, on the Gold Lion win. Ken, did Bananas set out to do work with brands outside South Africa, or did that happen while you were pitching for work locally and internationally?
I think I think it's just, when things start to click and things start to fall together, everything kind of feels like it's destined, right? And that's exactly what happened with Bananas. My partner Justin had been coming out of his clause with Dentsu, so he was free to get back into the industry again. I think I had reached a point in my career where I felt like I just wanted a new challenge. London broke me. if I'm honest, I spent two or 3 years at AMV BBDO, brilliant agency, beautiful people, just an incorrect culture for a creative like myself. And during that time, I thought it was maybe a good time to maybe start something of my own. And I've been chatting to Sohail, who used to work at KFC South Africa. We did a lot of work together, and I told him my plans, and he said his business was out to pitch, and we had been lucky enough to be invited to it, and we won the pitch. And so we don't want to limit ourselves to. We definitely do want to work in South Africa, but we don't want to limit ourselves to just South African brands. At AMV, I watched us make work for Guinness Africa. And I was like, why is an agency in Europe making work for Africa? And if they can do that, then we could probably make work in Europe and Asia and anywhere else in the world. So that's definitely the ambition, but also definitely to have a real influence on creativity and the work at home in South Africa. Sorry for the long answer.
No, it's perfect. Danette, over to you.
Xolisa, I was actually at Creative Circle last week. Last week? Yes, this week. Last week. Feels like very long ago. And I was really interested in the discussion that you gave us about how difficult it is when you are part of the jury to give context. You think it's easy, but it actually wasn't. And so how important is it that your entry, or that you make sure that the cultural nuances of entries are understood? Obviously talking from a South African perspective, but it could be for any entries, and how that plays a role in getting into a shortlist and getting into winning.
Yeah, it's such an interesting one, Danette, because for me, what these kind of things do is that they highlight, in my view, a bit of a disadvantage that perhaps we have on these kind of stages, because there is a confirmation bias that I think happens almost unconsciously with a lot of people. I mean, if you think of big international brands, I mean, these are brands that whether you're American, whether you're European, you live with them, you know them. I think if you are going into those kind of awards shows with, and I'm just using brand as one metric, but let's say you are going in with a brand that is a local brand, so of absolutely no relevance to them whatsoever. You are submitting a piece of work that's based on a local insight, once again, of absolutely no relevance, not relatable at all to them. So I think, if you really look at it, our backs are very much against the wall. And that is why how you put that entry together is everything. Because you don't always have a Xolisa in the room, a Saf in the room to be able to give the context. And so you've got these people that have never heard of the brand, that have absolutely zero context as to what's the cultural nuance that you're playing into. So that entry form becomes your mouthpiece, and that is why it is so important. It is so important to be able to really give people a sense of the context of your entry. And that was one thing that we learned so much in with regards to our category in radio, where where you would have something and the jury would literally, and it's funny because I mean, me as a South African, it was actually with some of our South African work, and I had to be out of the room, but there were so many questions around things like, but but is this, does this brand do that in this category? Is this how they would usually behave? And it was a lesson for us, because you need to give them that context, that this is a brand that behaves in this way. This is a brand that is known in the territory for this kind of work. So that for them, it's not just a once off thing that seems to have been done for awards, but it's the general way that the brand behaves. They've never heard of the brand. This is the brand, all of those things. So, yeah, I think a big thing for me coming back from Cannes is to be able to say, for lack of a better word, South Africa, you are on your own. So it's up to you to be able to really give context as to what it is that you are doing and why it is that you are doing it in the way that you are doing it.
Can I just jump in there, Xolisa? So some marketers that we've had on the show have argued that Cannes should potentially consider an Africa specific category or something along those lines, given this nuance that you're talking about, given the culture, given the sort of difference or uniqueness. What's your take on that?
Look, I think it's difficult to fully give context, but I don't think it's impossible. And I think, unfortunately, where one would struggle with that type of argument is then you could argue that you would be justified to do the same for many other territories. So I think that level of it makes it, will give you some challenges practically with that type of solution. And so, and I think until and unless we find that it's completely untenable to be an African brand, if we find that no matter what you do to set that context, the biases that exist just aren't allowing us to break through, I think only then can you really say that, okay, then we are justified in this call. But I think before then, there is still quite a lot of work that we can do to set that context. It's our cross to bear, unfortunately, because we just live in a global economy where Apple is Apple is Apple. And when you see a piece of work from Apple, whether you like it or not, there is a sort of knowledge base that exists within you that says, this is Apple, this is one of the world's most precious brands, they take risks, this is the kind of work that they do. And unfortunately, for a lot of local brands, they don't get that kind of predisposition when people look at your work, and you've got to work that much harder. As I said, difficult, but not impossible.
Can I carry on with that point and ask Saf? So I love that KFC ad that won gold. And I think it talks to exactly what we're saying, is that we all know it's a KFC ad. It has that kind of feel and that. But I feel like that ad, you could play it anywhere and you could still relate to it. So how do you take it further so that it becomes something that everyone goes, oh yeah, I really enjoyed that ad because I feel something. How do you do that? How do you distill that across boundaries?
Yeah, I think what's really important, and maybe something that we take for granted sometimes because we work in an industry that's so fast-paced, is that the brands that have a really clear role, a brand role, in terms of what it is that they do, a very simple and defined role, usually end up making the best work, right? And I think, one of my highlights at Cannes, and if the guys in my creative department hear me talk about this, it would be Clash of Clans, because I keep referencing all of the work, and it's very simple. It's a brand role that clashes with something in popular culture or within the culture of the game. KFC is a very similar role in culture. It can play into a realm of obsession and taste, and you see that in South Africa, and you're seeing that coming to life around the world, and it's something that we bring to life here. So it becomes very much about how far can you push the singular brand role, which is just about obsessing over a taste. And it's very easy to get there. And you see Clash of Clans do it perfect. It's the most simple thing. It was one of the most beautiful things that I saw at Cannes. I got there a little bit late for the Clash of Clans talk. And there were two dudes standing on stage, and they were riffing off each other, and they were talking about these four very simple campaigns, big campaigns. Remember, Clash of Clans is very much retail as much as it is gaming, because they're selling merchandise, they're selling coins, they're selling things all the time online. And they spoke about these very four simple campaigns that they did. It was Clash of the Past, Clash of Erling Haaland. They clashed with something within the game. And they spoke about it like they all believed it, and they knew there was just one direction to head into. It becomes very easy to sell work to your client when you all believe in the same thing. After the talk, I remember walking out with Chantal. And I was like, wow, what a great creative team. And she was like, that's not the creative team, that's the ECD and the CMO that were talking to each other. And I think that's how you start getting into a space where you can make really great work. We lucky at Bananas, we have Sohail Limbardo, who's the CMO of KFC Thailand here, and we have similar conversations and a similar relationship where he's almost like an undercover creative with us working, but we all have one direction, and everybody in the business on my side and his side knows exactly what the brand needs to say. It's our job to push it as far as possible. And that's what we have fun doing on a daily basis. It's lovely.
So, Saf, you've of course been recognized. I mean, at Cannes, we're talking about the Cannes now, but there's also the one show as well where there was huge recognition as well for Bananas. I think there are two questions that come to mind for me. The first is, what makes work, and this is for both of you actually, but I'll start with you, Saf. What makes work award-worthy internationally? number one. And secondly, what are some of the nuances and differences that you found? Even though it's KFC, were there any nuances or differences that you found in culture, in how the brand behaves in Thailand versus how it would have been in South Africa? I know that on your end, Xolisa, as well, Joe Public, Joe Public has an international footprint. Are there any nuances that you find that are different in different parts of the world? Starting with you, Saf, I think with KFC, with this work specifically.
I think that if you look universally at what people are consuming at the moment, it's very random and it's very out there, and it's a mashup of genres. So you'll see, I had a strategist talk to me about a TV show that he watched, which was a true life drama. But then there was a ghost that appeared in this true life drama and then disappeared. It was never acknowledged, never spoken about, never resolved. And that's okay. And I think that what we all need to embrace, and we saw work from France. There was there was a golden film for the I think it was for blind insurance, where people were literally stabbing their eyes, and that's Europe. So I think that there's a world of absurdity that we all need to tap into. If you scroll on TikTok for no longer than 5 minutes, you'll see exactly why. It's how we consuming content and how we consuming storytelling at the moment. I think the less linear things become, the better they become. And in terms of entertainment, it also leads you to fresher places. And that's not just for storytelling within film. I think, again, if we reference Clash of Clans, Clash of the Past, that's something that they did within that piece of work, where they recreated a past that didn't exist for themselves, So there's a lot of absurdity, and I think if you lack that, and obviously with the right brands, I speak on behalf of Bananas, and that's the kind of work we make. Tolly will speak to Nedbank, which has a whole different vision, which is also beautiful, and the way they've done that has been nothing short of beautiful, So that's my view on it.
Xolisa, your take, especially, and also I think include, I suppose, some of your the behind the scenes, I suppose, sitting behind the scenes judging the work as well, and also what some of these cultural nuances are when you work with the same brand in different parts of the world. Do they behave differently?
Yeah, it's so interesting for me. I'm a big believer in local relevance. And it's probably one of my favorite parts, for instance, about the gold-winning work from Bananas on KFC. I think it's amazing, and it's a beautiful bonus when work is relatable across different parts of the world to different people. But I think for me, it's probably 100 times more fulfilling when that work is resonant to the people that it's made for. I think for me, the danger is where we find ourselves in a uniform version of creativity that is informed by some space or some place. I think that for me is the one thing that I always fear, because for me, that will represent a sad chapter for creativity. And that's why I love what Seth was talking about. Take a look at social media. When you talk about content creation, South Africa is one of the leading spaces. We punch way above what we should in terms of content creation. That is the ingenuity of our people. That is the ingenuity of our sense of humor, of our sense of emotion, of our sense of creativity. And so for me, a big thing, that's why I said to you that, I think it's not easy to get other people to get that context. But make no mistake, that context is as valid as anything that you see in popular American music videos. we are not going to try and be America. For us to try and be any other place would be to lose who we are. So I think that local first and then international second. And make no mistake, there is still a huge bar that we have to meet. Things like element of surprise, things like conceptually strong, very strong, things like incredibly well executed. So excellence in execution, all of those things. That is the one place where we all have to uphold that standard. And I think we should also never make the mistake of saying, well, because it's local, that's the only thing I'm hanging my hat on. Definitely not. It has to meet the excellence standards. But then for me, what adds on that extra layer, that most incredible layer, is when it's informed by the people that it's created for. That is what I love about the KFC piece that we were talking about. When I watch that piece, I think of myself as a consumer in Thailand who consumes this brand, who then sees this piece of communication, completely relates to it, goes with where it goes, as bizarre as the whole thing is. I mean, when I look at that piece, I'm like, frick, absolutely amazing for KFC Thailand. And then and then I become so much prouder when I know that it was actually done, through a local agency, because I know that what they would have had to do is to completely immerse themselves into that target market, into understanding what it is that they consume, how it is that they consume what they consume, how they think, how they behave, and that would have informed that. Then always, by the end of it, it's universal. That's the story of Amapiano. That's the story of everything that we do. We're not trying to create something else. We create our thing and we do it the way that we can, and then it takes off. And then it contributes to the wider realm of creativity, but it's South African creativity that's contributing. So that's what I'm really passionate about, and that's what I think that that for me is country duty. When you can take the things that we care about, the realities that we have, and you can put them on the world stage, not try and imitate somebody else in order to be recognized by the world.
Can I ask you in that, going with that? There's so many amazing things that we do here. Like we do amazing things for good. We spoke about content creation. Why are we not seeing entries into these new categories at Cannes? Like business for good, because we're good at that kind of thing. I mean, that's what we do. We solve amazing social issues in South Africa. But I'm not seeing that. I'm still seeing this reliance on radio and audio, which, as you said, has actually changed quite a lot, and we haven't moved with that. Why are we not seeing this, that we're in all these other categories? Because I think we could do really well in them. I'd love to know what you think of that.
So I'll give it a stab, and maybe Saf can also contribute on this one. But I'll tell you this much. I think for me, what we're not talking about in this conversation is the fact that I don't think that as a country, we believe enough in creativity and the difference that it can truly make to business. And it's very interesting for me because what it takes to create the kind of work that has the kind of impact that we see so much of the work that we admire have is it takes 50% of the agency. It takes the 150% of that 100% is the agency. The other 50% is the client and the brand. And what I find is that we still come from a history where the awards stuff is stuff that's done on the side, not really where the major budgets go, not really, it's still looked at as the little niche things that we do on the side. And I think that what we need to do as a country is that is the stuff that we should be investing in. That is the stuff that is disruptive. That is the stuff that is progressive. That is the stuff that gets people talking. But I think we are still very scared and we're still following a lot of old ways. So have the product and the price because that's what we've learned works. And that's the battle that the CMO has to fight against the C-suite or the CEO who is saying, I want to see immediate results. But I think when you look at these brands that over time have built their equity, if you talk about the Dove as an example, it's taken so long and that level of consistency that now when they put out that work, that's the work that moves the share price. But I think for me, what we still need in South Africa is we need a true belief in creativity that is backed up by evidence of what we invest in the creative work, rather than letting it be on the side. Because then that's when I think we can start to enter these categories that you are talking about, Danette. They need real evidence. And the only way that you can go into that is if both the client and the agency say, this is where we are willing to put our money because we believe that this is what will make real business results. That is what I think many agencies are trying to achieve with their clients. To say, let's not make the award winning stuff. In fact, forget about award winning. Let it be consumer winning. Because if you can do that, then the awards are a byproduct. But I think we need to change our relationship with how we think about awards as marketers, as brands, as companies, even as agencies. Because I think we also have got our fair work to do. That's why I mentioned that it's not like we are churning out all these award-winning concepts, even as agencies. That stuff takes a lot. And it's out of 100, it's probably 2-3%. How do we create more of it? How do we move from 2-3% to 10% as a country, both on market side and on agency side? Sorry, Saf, over to you.
No, I agree 100%. I think, investing in creativity and the way we think is exactly it, but it needs to go through the entire ecosystem. And I mean, I haven't fully operated in South Africa in quite some time, but from my experience, I've always felt disconnected from my media agency, my PR agency, my social media agency. And I think it's so important to connect all of those things together if you really want to start entering those categories and understanding them. Because I promise you, my very brilliant copywriter who can write a lovely film script to sell fried chicken is not going to be the best strategic entry into Cannes next year, but you need to connect with the people that will be, or strategic social entry into Cannes. You know what I mean? Or even media is such a lovely category at Cannes these years. You see all of these sorts of things, but I think it's so unfortunate that we don't play more with media and they don't play more with us, and the rest of the ecosystem doesn't connect before you actually sit in a boardroom with your client to solve it. And I think once we start getting that right and getting a simple way of working together where we can make one little integrated campaign, we won't get there. Very, very, very simple, right? We in South Africa, for some reason, have TV ad, social media campaign, maybe 3 radio ads to support it, and then like an activation and some in-store with the same message, right? But what you look at the trend and what are the big work that wins, it's just one idea that's everywhere. Just one very simple integrated idea. It's a journey and it takes you. Then I think we need to start getting ourselves into the habit of thinking that way, and then getting in our marketers into the habit of buying that kind of work, and that's why shows like Can are so important.
If you're enjoying The Lead Creative, please share this episode with your network and hit follow or subscribe. Enjoy the show. One of the things that comes up a lot, Saf, in these conversations is this idea of trust between the agency and the brand. I don't know how long the relationship between you and KFC has been. I don't know how long you've been in that partnership, but to create that sort of groundbreaking work, the sort of groundbreaking work that we see Joe Public do with Nedbank, for example, you need to have that long-standing relationship, or at least it looks that way from the outside. How do you build that trust to create this kind of groundbreaking work that almost goes completely opposite to what we usually see KFC do?
I think it's we sit in our agencies after the presentation's gone bad and we kick up a fuss and we're like, client, be brave. But we haven't been brave enough to do it. I'm a firm believer that if I can't walk into a boardroom and then sell my product to Suhail, how can I expect him to trust me to sell his 7 million pieces of chicken to the whole of Thailand or grant to South Africa or whatever it is? So the sell is important, and the sell doesn't just happen in the boardroom. It starts a long time before that. And again, that's a trend that I've noticed at Can is that the brand side and the agency side are becoming partners rather than this force that's like almost against each other. And that's important. I have that relationship with Suhail. Suhail believes in good creative work. It starts with him. It starts with him influencing his people to do the exact same thing. I think we see it with Nedbank, and I'm sure Tolly and Pepe had a lot to do with inspiring the client side and doing that. And I'm sure they don't even refer to them as clients. They probably call them partners or friends, or I saw them cheersing at Can. They didn't look like they were agency and clients. They just looked like one. And that's important. The foundation, I promise you, without that, there's nothing. I always tell young creatives, don't chase ECDs, don't chase CDs. Look for good brand managers and CMOs. Go there, because ultimately that's where the good work gets made. And we just desperately need more of those in South Africa, and quickly.
Yeah. And before I hand over back to Danette, Xolisa, one of the things that was a hot topic last year coming out of Cannes and coming out of quite a few awards, and I think you touched on it briefly now when you were talking about investing in creative, is creative effectiveness. And this idea that creative effectiveness last year and the year before was very short term in its approach, was very much performance driven. I don't know how that was at Cannes this year and some of the shows that you've already seen. But you spoke about this investment and, of course, there's this creative effectiveness. How has creative effectiveness shifted over the past year or two since it's been such a hot topic? I see that, of course, we brought a lot of awards from a few international shows, both at Cannes and I think I saw at the DNAD as well. There was some work. Are we thinking more long term from a brand perspective now? And how's creative effectiveness looking now that it's been such a hot topic?
So I really am enjoying what's happening with creative effectiveness, because for me, creative effectiveness should always be a part of any creative conversation that we're having. I don't think that there is any creative in this day and age that would advocate for creative without creative effectiveness. But what I love is when you listen to really world-class marketers, guys like the Fernando Manchados and the likes, what they will bring to the table is, when you think of effectiveness, you need to be dynamic in what it is that you are speaking about. Because I think that the problem with effectiveness, which probably speaks to the short-termism that you were talking about, is that we usually only look at one narrow lens So people will talk about the fact that, okay, how much did you sell, as an example? I think that that is an important question, but it's but one question out of many questions that you could be asking. So, for instance, if you go and speak to someone like the Fernando and you ask him what was the objective of doing something like Moldy Burger, the Moldy Whopper. And it's incredible if you ever have the chance to go and read up, because he's done a few articles on it. And he speaks about the fact that so many people, when they look at that piece of work, will come back and say, oh, but well, how many burgers did you sell? It was never about how many burgers I'm selling. There was a different objective here. Our food was looked at as food that is not real. And that was causing a negative perception with our intended clients. And therefore, we needed to do something very, very drastic to make sure that our brand would be reappraised in this context. Now, once you start to break down what it is that your objective is, more than just saying, okay, I just want to sell. Your objective could be, I'm viewed as a brand that's old-fashioned. I'm viewed as a brand that is not digitally savvy. And yet, as a bank, I have the same products as every single other brand that's my competitor. And yet, if you ask somebody, if I told somebody what it is that my brand has, if I'm a bank, and you ask the person, who do you think provides that service? Chances are they'll probably name another bank. So how do I bridge that gap? So I think that as much as, it's a similar conversation with research. I don't think that oftentimes as marketers, we interrogate this idea of effectiveness enough. What do we mean by effectiveness? What is the specific outcome that we're looking at? And I promise you, for me, that answer is not always black and white. So we need to go through that process. That's why I'm saying that for me, it's a similar thing with research. A lot of times you'll hear people that will say to you that creatives have got a problem with research. It's not true. Everything that we do should be informed, and that's what research helps us to do. But what is the context within which you look at the research, and what is the context within which you interpret the research? One of my favorite stories is the Coca-Cola story. When Kaya used to work for Coca-Cola, and they had this idea of doing an ad with Bobby, the ad that they ended up doing with the little dog. You know that ad in research actually did very badly, because what came out is the fact that Black people don't want to see dogs in their ads. But what was amazing is that the brand and the agency, they dug a lot deeper than that. And then they said, let's look into this thing. Instead of just saying that we won't do this ad, what specifically is it that the people have got a problem with? Only to find that for a lot of African families, how dogs are usually portrayed in ads is not how they relate to dogs. So a dog will be inside the house. A dog will be on the couch. A dog will be so so there was a context to that research and that result. And then suddenly they looked at their script, and the entire script had a dog that was not inside the house. The dog is running around the streets looking for its name, which is exactly how we know dogs to behave as the majority of South Africa. And it wasn't talking, none of those things. And they were able to create one of their most successful ad, freaking taken across over 80 different countries. And it's because they were able to have a conversation that dug deeper than just a superficial, answer from research that just said people don't want to see this. And so I believe that the same thing applies to when we talk about effectiveness.
Saf, I want to ask you a question, a little bit different. So you were saying you're going to be in Bangkok for at least another year. So there's been a lot of talk about the fact that South Africa's lost some of its best creatives. that sort of middle gap and a lot of senior creatives. And I'd like to address that. What you're working in another country. So, what are the benefits of South African creatives moving out of South Africa and then, let's say, coming back like you? What are the negative aspects of this happening?
That's such a loaded question in itself. There's so many dynamics at play, for creatives. I can talk to my experience. I big patriotic South African. I hated having to leave, but I needed to. I think it was good for me. Coming back was exciting, and being able to establish Bananas in South Africa was exciting because I look around the world and I see, and I can name people from, Malou's come back now, but, Justin Anderstein and the Monique Kaplins and Steph, who's in London, Nick and Nudge, who are my CCOs at AMV. South Africa is filled with talent, people who can make really great work. And again, I'll reference a piece of work which was Boards of Change done in Chicago, which took protest boards and turned them into voting booths. That piece of work is globally insightful. It could have been done in South Africa, could have been done in South America, it could have been done anywhere in the world. You know who did it? It was a South African dude who did it for America. And it makes my heart so sore that those ideas are living there and not here. And I hope that we can turn the corner. I think there's agencies that are doing that. There's a man sitting on the call that's doing exactly that and making South Africa seem like a more lucrative destinations for creatives that want to make good work. I think we just need to tap into it a little bit deeper. But I promise you, none of this happens until the people that are in charge of brands start becoming a little bit braver, a little bit more risk averse, and changing their perception of how their consumers consume whatever they make in terms of communication and advertising. So for me, that's a very important place to start. It's with our CMOs and our brand managers. We've got great talent here. There's no problem with the creatives in South Africa.
Xolisa, I see you shaking your head there in agreement. And I wanted to ask you the same question. And I wanted to ask you, how important is it that we have people like yourself at Cannes? You were the president of the jury. You weren't just a jury member, you were the president of a jury. And we had a lot of South Africans on juries. How important is it that we have our creatives sitting in places like Cannes on the jury?
Yeah, I think it is absolutely vital, and I think it is so important. You know, this year South Africa had probably one of its biggest contingents in Cannes in a very, very long time. And to the point that Saf is making, I honestly think that there is such an opportunity for us as a country. I honestly think that, South Africa is one country that when we all put our efforts together, that's when real change happens. Whether you're talking sport, whether you're talking anything, when we all unite behind something, that's when real change happens. And therefore, that is the reason why I think that we have the challenge that we have. It's because we are not yet all united behind what this opportunity represents. And unfortunately for us, it's something that we always say, bad work actually works. That's the reality of it. There are people that go into marketing positions and will basically live out their career just maintaining how it is that they found it. But unfortunately, in the context of being in a global competitive world, in a media competitive world where consumers get to choose what they want to consume, in this space where brands which have shareholders have got to find a way to break through into that autopilot that all consumers find themselves. In that world, What is needed is a proper collective effort where every single CMO in South Africa, every single agency in South Africa sees themselves as people that can really, really create groundbreaking work. That is what we try and do as an agency with our clients. We always remind them that you came to us for a reason. You came to us, you came to an outside supplier. And the only thing that we can offer you, the one thing that we believe in, if this agency didn't have a creative department, it would cease to exist. So it's the one thing that we want to offer you, and it's backed up by science, it's backed up by strategy, it's backed up by all these responsible things. But I can promise you that when you do this thing right, then you start to see brands like Nike. Then you start to see brands like Unilever. Then you start to see brands like Apple. That's the potential that we have here. And to the point that's been made by Saf, when we don't do that, unfortunately, the domino effect is just so dire. You lose creatives. You lose young people that want to come into this field. The same young people that are making South Africa one of the prime spaces in all creative spaces. Go on to TikTok, we are leading. Go on to music, we are leading. Go on to acting, we are punching far above our weight. So why is it that the people who have shareholders wouldn't want to tap into that? And you know, you may as well create an amazing piece of work because it's just as easy to create a bad one.
Saf, I'll come to you. So you've proven that great ideas can land globally, and it's what, we're talking about at the beginning of this. What have you learned about adapting your sort of local thinking? And I'm not necessarily saying your thinking is because you've worked outside our shores, but what have you learned about adapting local thinking or adapting your thinking without losing the magic in the translation, especially for an audience that is seemingly so different from, say, a South African audience as the sort of Thailand audience is, because you worked in London and then you did this great work. How did you not lose the magic while translating your thinking to that market, or do you not have to?
I think there's a certain degree of it. It's complicated because there's times where you have an idea that anybody could get, but what makes it funny is the executional nuances that are so locally relevant, so that changes everything. And there's times where that in itself just becomes the big idea. But then there's also times where the insight is just very, very British or very, very Thai that won't be got. Nobody else in the world's going to get it, and that happens as well, and those are beautiful. It's just about knowing when and how. It's it's a crazy process, and it's very chaotic. Um, but you kind of get there because it all starts honestly with your insights and the insights around the brand and the people. And I promise you never know. It's going to be universal. It's going to be ultra local. At the end of the day, to Tolly's point, you always you're always looking at an idea. And I think for me, during my experience in South Africa, London, and here in Thailand, is it's always been very executionally nuanced insights that are brought into the work and make it feel or give it more of a local context.
Very interesting, Saf. And perhaps that's why I even referenced that piece of work and to say to you and to freaking take my hat off, because that piece of work is so unmistakably Thai. Before it is everything else, it is so unmistakably Thai. And you know what I find interesting is that for a long time as South Africa, that for me is what was missing from our work. The South Americans have it, the Thai work has it, A lot of work from the East has it. And that for me, yeah, exactly. And that's why I'm saying that, for a long time, and that's what excites me, because for a long time, a lot of work of ours that used to win back in the day was amazing. But I felt that if there's one thing that I would infuse into that work, is that I wanted it to be work that is unmistakably from here. And that for me is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about how diverse our industry has become. Because now the work is becoming more reflective of more South Africans. And that's why I'm so passionate that we need to make sure that it finds its space on this global stage. If we need to, to use their context in order to create our context, then so be it. We need to find these tricks about how do I make you know that there is a brand in South Africa that is born here, that is relevant here, that is amazing here, and it deserves to be looked at just like any other brand that you've been consuming since you were a kid, because South Africans have been consuming it since they were kids.
I agree, Tolly. I think, I think the first thing that, and not all of us, but I think most agencies and creators and brand representatives need to do is be very honest with themselves about when they are manipulating and having fun with and hacking an insight rather than just mirroring it. And I think there's a systemic problem in South Africa. And it's when I switch on the TV and I see our advertising or listen to the radio or look online, I see just a mirror of culture being played right back at me. And we're not living in a world where we can do that anymore. The generations that we speak to and the people that we speak to want to have fun. They want us to, like, let's take an insight and make it go left, So I think that's something that we need to be very strict with on ourselves and call it out. The minute we're mirroring an insight, be like, if a client could have come up with it themselves, Sidi Sorangaka used to always say, then they do not need the ad agency.
I think you're so right. I agree with you. And that's why I think I want to make this so clear. When you look at this conversation that we're having, we are pinpointing a lot of challenges, but make no mistake, there is no doorstep that these challenges fall on that doesn't start with us as creatives. We are in no way saying that the creatives are, I think we are all equally responsible to change it. And that's why I love what Saf is saying, because localization can never be an excuse for not thinking conceptually. The conceptual part of it is the most utmost when it comes to creativity. There is no excuse for that. So the dressing of it is important, but at the core is, when you watch a piece of work and you're like, how the hell did they think of that?
How did they get it so?
That's what we freaking do, because how did they get it so right, dude? Let me send it to someone on my WhatsApp. Let me ask someone at church if they've seen it, or at the braai. That's when you know that you've done your freaking work.
Xolisa, I'll come to you now with this question, this next question before handing back over to Danette. I think you've mentioned insights, you've mentioned packaging the work, you've mentioned the burden being on you, the person putting the work out there, to let that insight shine through. You've mentioned, I suppose, bringing in that nuance. Following, I suppose, all of those things, given all of those things, what else do international juries look for? And how do we package our work and create our work in a way that meets whatever they're looking for without losing our authenticity?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, I honestly just think it's just being aware of what we are entering into. And if you want to appeal to those people, you do your research. You look at what do they recognize? All the clues are there. What do they recognize? How is that packaged? So how do I take my product and be able to tick those boxes knowing what it is that they are looking for? And so I think it really is, I don't think we do enough of this. And that's why I made that example just now where I said, if I have to pander to your context in order to give you my context, then that's what I need to do. I think oftentimes one of the things that we've discovered, for instance, as an agency, is that what we don't think about enough is that I'll say to you that, I've got this amazing candle. I've got this amazing candle. It comes from South Africa. It's this. It comes from Limpopo. That's this and the third. But that's my context. But oftentimes what I'm not doing is I'm thinking, what's the context of the person who's looking at this? You get what I mean? It's a slight nuance change. But that's one of the things that we're starting to look into now, because all the clues are there. All the award-winning work is there. So you just take a look at, okay, what are the things that they've put into this that we need to make sure that we are able to put into our piece as we elevate, our explanation and trying to get them to understand it. Not yet Uhuru, my friend.
I always wonder. So, for example, Halo won Ad Focus Agency of the Year last year. They also won the bookmarks. No, the Effies. They won the Grand Effie, and they're essentially an independent agency. The odd number independent agency was the Lurie's independent agency, and they were the only one to win a pencil this year. But where are these agencies at Cannes? And how do we get more independent agencies? They often are the ones making that work that's got that lovely local nuance. How do we get more local agencies, not local, independent agencies to enter? And is it a fair question, or doesn't it really matter? It's really for either of you or both of you.
The one thing that I actually meant to say earlier on is there are some practical challenges with Cannes. And I also think that we need to speak about those. I think financially, the cost of Cannes is actually quite prohibitive. I think, we're talking dollars here. And if you are a local agency, let alone an independent, it is extremely, extremely, extremely difficult to be able to afford it. And, Mongezi, earlier you asked about, whether we should look at different provisions that speak to Africa or South Africa with regards to international shows like that. For me, if there's one place that I would definitely say that I think that we should lobby, or I think that they really should look at, it is just with regards to the astronomical costs of the whole thing. It is extremely expensive. And that's why a lot of independent agencies, if you're an independent agency, you have to think so hard. You spoke about Odd Number. Odd Number had an entry in my category. It's the same entry that they won the pencil for at DNAD. An incredible, incredible piece of work. Unfortunately, it just so happened to be entered into the wrong category. There was a better category for it. And unfortunately, it's one entry that they could afford. And then to lose out on a technicality like that. So I think that is the one place that I think that, we're not on an equal footing. And I think that if you're not part of a network, it's even more difficult for you. And it's the one place where I wish that they could democratize, just our access to entering. I think that's a challenge that we all have.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I think I do this year. Spending all my money on award shows. Whatever profit we have, it's ridiculously expensive. And I think if we, as a creative community, I can't speak for global, but I can speak for South Africa, want to encourage more independence to rise, which I think we definitely should. then we need to look at things. You know, the Luries offers an independent pass. So if you're a startup, you for the first 5 years, I think it's like half the price of a normal pass, which we were lucky with. But we're still paying the same entry fees as the big agencies, and I think that can be at the discretion of the size of your agency, the country you're from, based off your currency. If I'm not mistaken, I think that either One Show or DNAD does do that. So one of the shows gives you a bit of a discount if your currency is at a certain like level, which is good. It's helpful. But I think we could all definitely. I mean, geez, publicists enters 100 things. How do you afford that? We can enter 3 or 4 maybe and then go bust. So it's something to think about, obviously.
Do you think it's worth something like Creative Circle starting up a fund and actually actively last year, Creative Circle, after our performance, which wasn't great, really spoke about pushing the agenda and working together and finding ways to do better at Cannes. So how do we do that? I mean, is it practical stuff like putting a fund together to help some independents? Is it sharing knowledge, getting together?
I think at the very least, it's starting the conversation. I think that as African creatives, we do have a voice on that global stage. And I don't think so far we utilize that voice enough to bring to the fore the reality of our challenges. And so I think that it is definitely something that I think an organization like the Creative Circle, which at the moment, for instance, we don't even really have a relationship there, which is something that we should, because we go through Stekinico. Stekinico are the local representation of Cannes. And so for me, I think that these are the kind of things where we should establish that relationship and bring some of these things to the fore. You know, if you don't ask, you'll never know.
Yeah, I mean, Danette, more than money, I think we could probably do with a shared knowledge. And for me, the first thing to get right for us is always going to be the work. I know we have some of it, but not a lot of it. I know we're a little bit proud of ourselves again. I don't think we should be that proud of ourselves. I think we can do a lot better. Holly agrees, I'm sure. So I think that's where the focus for us as a creative industry should lie right now is how do we push our work and get it recognized more often on the global stage as it used to be.
Okay, I'm gonna ask the sort of last closing question. I'll start with you, Saf. So we have a question that our guest usually leaves for our next guest. So think of it as our last guest passing the mic to you. And one of our previous guests was the head of marketing for VWSA, Bridget Harper. And her question was, how do you harness South African creativity to get the business results that you desire? Because, as she says, we've got so much special and unique talent here in South Africa that's uniquely South African. So how do you harness that uniquely South African creativity to drive a business result?
It's always been such a weird question for me, this, because I could never picture an American creative sitting in his office and going like, how do I use my Americanness to come up with the best creative idea? And I don't think the best creative South Africans do that either. You sit in there with your natural observations and your natural way of thinking, and you come up with ideas. I think yes, ideas in themselves are very much the outcome of the place that you're living in, the place that you're experiencing, the insights that you're observing. But I don't think any creative sits down and like goes like, okay, I'm South African today. I'm going to come up with it just comes to you naturally. And I think it's the idea that we focus on how we bring that idea to life in the best way possible, which is a much more important and a much more interesting thing to delve into. Because that comes with how do you manipulate that insight that comes to you naturally, that observation that you see every single day. What can you do with it to make an idea?
Yeah. And now over to you, Saf, to leave a question for our next guest. What's the one question that you'd like to ask our next guest about their work, their approach to creativity, life, or industry for that matter?
Can I get like a minute to think about it?
I'll come to you, Xolisa, with your question. It's a different one, but once again, we ask our guests to sort of leave a question for our next guest. And one of our previous guests was Angus Gibson, the director and producer and filmmaker whose work includes Yizo Yizo, Zone 14, Shaka Ilembe, and many others. And the question he left was, what right do we have to tell stories that are not our own? Is he, for instance, able to tell the story of a woman? Is he able to tell the story of a trans person? Is he able to tell the story of a black person as a white man?
I think we do have the right to tell stories. I think that if you specialize in storytelling, you've got a specific talent that can take any subject matter and can bring it to life, probably in a way better than most, because that's what you do, right? You're a storytelling professional. What I think our responsibility is, however, it is to make sure that the people who know that story, who live that story, who are that story, that those are the voices that are portrayed in your story. I think it's really, really important that you don't tell a story at the exclusion of the people that you're telling the story about. So I think that I think that it is absolutely possible. I don't think that your reality has to be the qualifying criteria in order for you to tell a story, because I think then we'd have very limited stories. But I think the collaboration around ensuring that if you are telling a story that isn't necessarily your own is absolutely crucial to make sure that you are amplifying the voice of the people that actually do live that story. And, so that you're not just creating something that's uninformed. I think that's, or something that ends up being appropriation, all those kind of things. I think that's really, really important.
Now over to you with the same question, Xolisa. What's the one question that you'd leave for our next guest about their creative process, their work, or their thoughts on the industry?
I would probably say, here's my question to the next person. What do you think is holding South Africa back from truly, truly reaching our creative potential? What do you think is holding us back from truly, truly reaching and living our true creative potential?
Thanks for that. Saf, are you ready now?
So my question to your next guest would be maybe something that puts them on the spotlight, but also a very important question. Is, and hopefully it's an ECD or creative director or CCO of the sorts. But when was the last time you took your client out for lunch with an idea you truly believed in and got him to buy into it?
Perfect. Great question. Thank you so much, Saf and Xolisa. This was an amazing conversation, and thank you for staying on the extra time because, the insights and the thoughts that you had to share were so great. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Saf and I enjoy so much time together that even when it's on somebody else's podcast, we count it all day. So thank you, Saf.
No, it was great.
Always good
Awesome.
to see
Thank you,
man.
guys.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank
Mons.
you. Cheers. Thank you for listening to The Lead Creative. Did you get one insight that's worth sharing from this episode? Please share it with your network or your friends. Pop me some of your ideas and innovative finds on Twitter on @Mongezi. This podcast is available on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also find me on Mongezi.com.